And then I moved to Google. So I moved to Belgium, where I worked in the Google data center in Belgium again for a few years. Focus on infrastructure. And
welcome to the Cloud Native Talk episode 10. And as you can see, we have the greatest personality here, as he is the senior developer advocate at Google, and he is also the Kubernetes podcast host, co-host, and he has done various things. So I will not, if I want to introduce, still I can't introduce him because he has done various things. So without wasting time, we will ask Abdul what he has done till now and how what he is currently doing, and he can introduce himself. Yeah. Sure, Abdul, go ahead. Go forward.
thank you very much. Introduce myself. This is actually one of the hardest questions that people ask me all the time. So I'm Abdel. I'm based out of Stockholm, Sweden. I'm actually originally from Morocco. If your followers are mostly based out of India and Pakistan, do not confuse Abdel and Abdul, because I think Abdul is a very common name in that part of the world. And Abdel is actually my nickname, but my long Arabic name is too complicated for people to pronounce.
Got it.
So a lot of time people just walk to me, like, "Hey, Abdul." I'm like, "No, that's not how it's supposed to." Anyway, so I'm originally from Morocco. I lived in Belgium for a while, and then I moved to Sweden for like 6 years now. So I work at Google. This is my 9 years and a half at Google. I'm a cloud developer advocate, as you said. Basically focused on Kubernetes and service mesh is my main area of focus. But my background is really in software engineering. I have a master's in software engineering, but I sort of almost never worked really as a software engineer. I started working in a very uncommon place that people probably never think about. My first job was actually in a data center. I was working as an infrastructure engineer. You could call it nowadays DevOps, but I was kind of a Linux administrator / developer in a data center. That was my first job back home. Yeah. And I moved to Google. So I moved to Belgium, where I worked in the Google data center in Belgium again for a few years. Focus on infrastructure. And then I moved to Sweden, where I initially was actually working in something called professional services, which is like a consulting part of Google Cloud. So it's a team that customers basically pay for our time, and then we can help them with things, right? With implementing stuff on Google Cloud. And then now, Developer Advocacy is a year. Beside this, I co-host the Kubernetes Podcast since October last year with my co-host Kathleen Fields. We try to interview people who are have interesting things to share with the community. And I have a little podcast that I have started during COVID, but as every other project that people started during COVID stopped. But I'm planning to go back at some point. It's called the Cloud Careers Podcast, and I was trying to basically interview people about what they do right in cloud and just give the audience like sort of perspective of what jobs are available. And and since literally this Saturday, I am a CNCF ambassador. I was accepted into the ambassador program. So
newest one.
Yeah, the new version. Because I've been active in the cloud native space for a while. I started the Cloud Native Compute group in Casablanca, Morocco. The first one in Africa a while ago, and I've been going to a lot of KubeCons and all sorts of various events, and so yeah. So this is what I do.
Yeah, this is the post you. So the most so CNCF ambassador is not unachievable for people like you, but I think it is one of the biggest achievement if you are in the CNCF world, and if you are familiar with the CNCF Cloud Native Community Foundation and community groups, case studies, and various things. So on the previous episode, we had the Audra. She is the community manager for the CNCF. So I guess Cloud Native Talks, because I have seen various things are available at the cloud and various platforms, but there is only little podcasts out there who are focusing mostly on the Cloud Native. So like Kubernetes Podcast, there are other Rockwood podcasts, and there is another Cloud Native podcast. So let's try to my goal is let's try to invite folks who are in the Cloud Native and ask the doubts, and which will help the our followers to get into these things, and as you talked about. So I would like to ask about this thing, what was your means like previous things you were doing, and now you are the senior developer advocate at Google. So
Yep.
you landed this job. Like, how was your journey?
So how did I land it? It's basically when I was actually in professional services, when I was in my previous role in Sweden. So the team I came to Sweden to join, that team, we worked quite a lot with customers. So we had some of the largest Google Cloud customers, and we would just basically work with them as consultants. So help them design, but not consultants in the sense of like PowerPoint presentations and that's it. Like we were hands-on, right? So we would help them design and
Got it.
architect. We would help them get access to some engineering teams and product managers so they can actually talk to us and get an idea about the roadmap for the products on Google Cloud. And my focus was essentially Kubernetes, right? GKE, the managed offering, which is Google Kubernetes Engine, and a little bit. So like the last 2 years, I picked up Istio, Service Mesh. I started working on that, and that job was quite interesting because you get exposed to a lot of interesting use cases, and like you get to learn about various industries. I worked with banks, I worked with e-commerce companies, I worked with like a lot of different sectors and industries. But the downside of the job, or the thing I didn't like, is that the stuff you build remains internal because you are building things for a customer under a contract, right? So you don't get to open source it. You don't get to it's very hard to actually put something outside. And during those 4 years I spent in the team, I was actually doing conferences. I was going to events because I always liked this concept of public speaking, right? I was going to events. I served on the program committee for a couple of events, so reviewing the content that people submit. And then after COVID, so we were like all stuck at home for like 2 years. I kept doing that a little bit virtually, and then eventually I got like tired of it because at some point I was tired of just being in front of a camera and microphone for all the time. And and then I came to the realization that actually I like more the public speaking sort of community work more than the actual working with customers in short.
Right.
And then started looking around. I knew about the developer advocacy job. I knew the team. I knew they exist. I just submitted to like a ping the manager internally and the manager for the team in EMEA, and I was like, hey, I'm interested. And it took a little bit of time, and then eventually I could join the team.
So you work for only for Sweden or like entire
No,
US
my role is global. My role is global. We're not
Yeah.
any. I mean, in these days, because of some kind of constraints, and we're trying also to reduce how much travel we do. I mostly focus on Europe or EMEA, so Europe, Middle East, and Africa. But I have gone to the US before. I have never been to KubeCon in America. I've mostly gone to KubeCons in Europe. We'll see if this year we'll be able to go. But yeah, most of my in-person engagements happen in Europe. Most of the conferences I go to are in Europe or Africa sometimes. Most of the virtual work I do is basically global.
Got it. So most of your focus is most on the Europe side, and you are global. Like nowadays, every developer advocate is global. So
Exactly.
only some teams they're focusing on the regions and stuff. So it is nice. Like you to summarize everything, you had nice journey from the customer engineering side to the developer advocacy side, and moving from the customer engineering to developer advocacy takes a lot of thinking. So if your audience and if you think it is easy, no, it is not easy because you have to go through various decisions and because customer engineering is something we are focusing on the customer side and getting the business ideas and use cases and then understanding the problems, and that somewhere I guess somewhere helped you in making the advocacy easier because you know the points, like what are the use cases, and you can talk about them.
Exactly.
So nice. So I would like to ask again. Next question will be like, how was your day to day life at the developer advocacy in Google? Because everybody's like dream is like in India it is like dream job for anyone to get into the Google and FANG companies. So getting developer advocacy at Google is like next level. So what is like part of your day and day to day life of yours?
It really varies depending on what we are doing, but I mean, sometimes I get to travel quite a lot. I would say probably I travel more than average developer, but that's because conferences and events happen in all different parts of the world, and you have to be in person sometimes. I actually personally prefer the in person attending a conference in person rather than virtually, because then you get to meet people and talk to them. There is this famous thing that most developer advocates say, that when you go to a conference and you have different tracks for different topics, the best track is what we call the hallway track, which is when you meet people in the hallway and talk to them, right? That's like the unorganized track. So there are weeks where I would just be traveling, going to events, giving talks and stuff like that. When I'm here, either I'm working on the Kubernetes podcast, so that takes a little bit of time because you have to research and find the guests and coordinate and meet and record and stuff like that. Luckily, we are lucky to have a production team, so we don't do the audio production ourselves. We get somebody else to do it for us. But we do pretty much everything else. So coordinating, publishing, all that stuff is done by us. We write the notes, all that things. Me and Kathleen, my co-host. So that's also some work I do. If I'm not doing either of those, I'm either preparing new talks, because you have to keep your content fresh and you have to always have ideas. Either doing something that has to do with talks, so either preparing new talks, preparing new demos, or sometimes like submitting to conferences, because conferences have sometimes CFP and you have to submit, or just playing around with our product, trying things, right? I have few projects I maintain, few open source projects I maintain, a few GitHub repositories I maintain, so I review pull requests and kind of fix bugs and stuff like that. So it really varies, a lot of hands-on work. Because the way, for those who don't really understand still what developer advocate do, a developer advocate job is to do two things: explain to developers how to use products, and take feedback from developers and push that feedback up the chain of the product engineering side, so the people who are building the products, right? But the first part, which is explain to people how to use products, is not like a lot of people sometimes think, oh, all we do is we just go read like a how to get started guide with something and then we go talk about it. But that's not how it works. Like, we have to write things, right? So it is a bit. Yeah. So I spent quite a lot of time actually playing around with Google products and seeing how they can work together. And based on use cases I heard, I would try to solve them a certain way. So it's a lot of building things. And then from those stuff you build, you sometimes get to realize, this use case, I have heard this before. It's probably worth turning this into a talk and submitting a paper or doing something. I also do a lot of writing. So we have like a blog post where we write articles there, and I also write to my own blog post. So it's mostly a lot of also writing. So yeah, it's like depends day to day.
Yeah, to summarize, I don't know how to summarize. Like, you have mentioned various points. To summarize, it is like you do talks creation to talks, getting it submitted, and then speaking at the conferences. Then you work on the Kubernetes podcast, which is one of the best podcasts available for any cloud-native folks available there. Other thing is you are working on blogs, content creation, documentation. Also, you are maintenance of various open source projects. So it is not like, if you think developer advocacy is just about like content creation and marketing and stuff. It is not like that. You have to be core contributor, you have to reviewer, as Abdul mentioned. And also, as we see, he has done this from previous time to now. Thanks for adding Kubernetes podcast. So I would also like to know, because I am a fan of this Kubernetes podcast from the long time. And when we previously, like in my company, we introduced the Istio service, Istio Ambient Mesh. That time I was really fascinated to like how the episode will be and how they will talk. So it was really nice. So I would like to hear about like how the Kubernetes podcast started, and now it is like Google Developer Advocacy maintains it really well. So when it started till now, how it has grown, and how was your experience when you got a thing like now I have to continue this co-host and continue Kubernetes podcast as a co-host. So yeah.
Yeah, so the Kubernetes podcast was started back in 2018 by two ex-Google employees. One of them is called Adam Click, who used to be product marketing for Kubernetes for GKE, and the other person is Craig Box, who used to be a developer advocate as well. So they initially started the podcast together, and they ran it for about 2 years, all the way until 2020. In 2020, a lot of things happened, including COVID, but the main event that happened is that Adam Craig moved to New Zealand, and because of the time zone difference, it made co-hosting the podcast with Adam difficult, and I think Adam eventually left Google. So then Craig continued running the podcast by himself until last year, where he announced he would leave the company, and then the search started for new hosts. And then eventually me and Kathleen, we expressed interest, and we took over the podcast. So we are like relatively short. We spend relatively less time than the previous hosts on it. We started basically back in October 2018. 2022, and we only published, I think, 5 episodes so far, because we're still figuring out how to work together. Usually the way we do it is that we have we're experimenting with new ideas. We're trying to do new things, but most of what we do is the old formats, which we still do, is a guest with one host, so either me or Kathleen interviewing a guest about a specific topic, and then before the interview, there is a news portion, and the news portion is essentially covering the news in the cloud native space since the last episode. And it's me and Kathleen at the same time. So we like go back and forth between each other reading news. So if you're a listener, this is normally what you're used to. You start news, boom, 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 and then the interview. And then after the interview, me and Kathleen, we get to chat a little bit about the interview itself, and then we finish. That's the typical format. Since we took it over, we started experimenting with new things. Like one of them, for example, was the episode we did about KubeCon Detroit, KubeCon North America, where Kathleen attended the conference, and she had like wireless microphones, and she was going around and asking people questions about KubeCon conference, etc. So sort of like kind of event coverage type episodes. So that actually did pretty well. We did also we also continued the one kind of tradition that the podcast was having is always interviewing the release lead of every new version of Kubernetes. So Kubernetes has 3 releases per year, and for each release, there is always a release lead. And the release lead is usually somebody from the community who is actually voted for, or I think selected by the communities. I don't remember what's the selection criteria is. But basically, the podcasts have been doing this as a habit, and we continue doing it. So last year, before version 1.26 came out, we interviewed Leonard, who was the release lead at the time. And this year, we're going to interview also the release lead for 1.27. 1.27 should be released before KubeCon Amsterdam in a few weeks from now. So that's essentially how it have been. So the podcast is quite popular. We average 15,000 downloads per episode. Our Twitter follower have grown by like 5K since we took it over in October. So like 5K followers.
Oh, nice.
We have, I think on a total, we have about 25,000 subscribers to the podcast across all the podcasting platforms. And it's increasing over time. The experience is great because one of my biggest fears, I would say, was that I'm gonna start or I'm gonna pick up something that have been done by somebody else. That somebody else had a set of followers and had a community that they like to listen to.
Yeah.
Right. So what would be the impact of just having new voices? And also the most important thing is how can we take this show and make it ours? Not just like those new ideas that we're experimenting with are our ideas, right? Because we want the podcast to have a different look and feel. Doesn't have to be pretty like monotone in the format. It doesn't have to be the same exact format all the time. So I think so far the experience is positive, very positive. We still have a lot of work to do. We still have a lot of things to experiment and test with. I would say probably if you would ask me 1 year from now, I would have a better idea about how things are going. But so far, I'm very happy. I'm very excited to be able to interview people. Actually, you get to talk to a lot of interesting people. Also because the podcast itself has a lot of followers and has a place in the community. It allows us to actually invite people that we want to invite. So when we reach out, and we say we want to have you, they generally speaking accept, because it's a very popular podcast compared to the podcast was small and just starting and no one knew about it. So I don't want to spoil, but during KubeCon we're gonna interview the CTO of one of the biggest companies in the cloud native space. They released a new feature, and we were very interested in having them talk about that new feature. It's like I don't want to spoil it too much, but it's a new technology that is gonna probably change how cloud works in the next 10 to 15 years. And this company released support for that feature. So that technology actually existed for a while in the cloud native space, for about maybe a year. And like it's an open source implementation, but now what we're seeing is that there are companies that are introducing it to their products, right? And we want to interview this company's CTO, and this whole thing happened on Twitter, right? Like the CEO of that company wrote a tweet, and I replied to them saying like, we would like to have somebody to interview, and then they said, yeah, just talk to this person. Right? It took like 5 minutes, right? So so yeah, it's overall going very well, I would say.
Yeah, nice. So I can guess like which are the technologies and stuff. So yeah, we can I know like what it can be. And so talking more onto this, so there are like I'm really excited about this talk, how it will be.
Yeah.
So so yeah, when talking about the Kubernetes podcast, you have taken it really nice. Like it is used to get some work and make it flourish and pass it on to the future. So you had done that really nice job. I have seen that KubeCon NA, that podcast. It was also nice. So yeah, keep doing it. You are rocking this thing. And going forward, I'm excited to learn about the Kubernetes podcast and how it will be. So it was really nice experience to learn about these things. And so currently, as you talk about, like you are working on various things, like you are in your company also, you deal with Google Kubernetes Engine and another services which are provided by Google. But are you working on any cloud native open source projects? And is there any project which like excites you currently, which is available on the cloud native, and you think like it in the future it will be booming the industry, and it can be, this is the technology which can be really nice. So what do you think on this?
There are two questions there. So am I working on anything open source in cloud native? Indirectly Kubernetes, right? So one of the repositories I maintain is called, there are actually two main repositories I maintain. There is one called the Network Policies Recipes repository, and there is one called the GKE Networking Recipes repo. So those are both repositories that contain not really code, they contain tutorials. One of them is the Network Policies repository, and that was started by a developer advocate called Ahmed, who was working at Google. He since left and joined Twitter, and before leaving, he just was looking for a new maintainer. I joined him as a maintainer, and basically what we do is we document various use cases for how to use network policies inside of Kubernetes, right? So that's one thing. And then the other one is the GKE Networking Recipes, which documents how the various APIs in Kubernetes integrate with Google Cloud, right? So that's the second thing. So how do you deploy load balancers and stuff like that? So these are the two main pieces of a repository. So they're not really directly open source projects or cloud native projects, but they are. So personally, I was always interested in this cross section of education and technology, and that's sort of the reason. One of the reasons I joined actually Developer Advocacy, because that's essentially what we're doing, we're teaching people things, right? And so those two repositories, the main goal is actually teaching, just showing people how to implement stuff, right, and explaining to people how stuff works. So this is on the first question. I don't remember what was the second question you asked.
Yeah, which is the technology like you think it will be booming the industry, and it is really fascinating?
Yes. So there are probably two that comes to mind. One is slightly old and was like kind of going around probably last year, is eBPF. So eBPF, for those who doesn't know, is used to stand for Extended Berkeley Packet Filters. It doesn't anymore. It's basically, eBPF is not an acronym. If you ask the eBPF people, they will tell you it's not an acronym. It's just the name of the thing, right? But what it is essentially, eBPF is a technology that allows you to run any random piece of code in the kernel space in a sandbox environment, right? So the idea there would be that you get to write code that is very close to where the kernel handles syscalls, and you could run it there, right? And so with this technology, you can do a lot of things. You can, for example, do observability. You can extract certain metrics from the kernel. You can implement certain filters, hence why it's called filtering. Essentially, eBPF is an evolution of a technology that was called BPF, which was something that was created to replace IP tables, right?
Yeah.
So in the evolution of firewalls and Linux, IP tables were like the original evolution. Then there was Linux firewall for a while. There was like something called App Armor for a while. And then eventually it got to a point where they wrote BPF, which was supposed to be the next evolution of IP tables. And then the way BPF was written, it was written in a modular way enough that some people thought, well, this actually can be used beyond just packet filtering. And so let's just took it and make eBPF, which is a framework that allows you to run code that can do whatever. So you might ask me, what is this useful? It's useful in some use cases. We can take the most common use case that you probably know about is for a very long time, Service Mesh was using this concept of sidecars in Kubernetes, where every pod runs the container, which is the application, and runs a little sidecar, like a little container next to it, which is the proxy. And the proxy will be in between the application and the network, and it will intercept the traffic coming in and out of the application and implement things on top of it, right? So like, for example, MTLS, adding certificates, removing certificates, rate limiting, things like that. This is obviously is a good solution, and it uses sidecars, which are native to Kubernetes, but it has a couple of problems. One of the main drawbacks is resource footprint. That proxy is a container that needs CPU and memory to run. And when you implement things like Istio, you realize that you will increase your resource utilization by about 50% because you have all these sidecars running, right?
Yeah.
So what eBPF was introduced to do is to be able to implement certain features, but in the kernel. So instead of having one sidecar per pod, you would have a single piece of code running on the node itself, so common to all the pods on that node, and it will implement things like blocking traffic, like adding and removing certificates, stuff like that, right? So that's one thing. So this is eBPF. And then there is that whole software supply chain security, which is like a very large field of things. For those of you who doesn't know what it is, I am not going to try to explain it right now. I will let you Google it. But I also recommend you go listen to the last episode we did with Emily Fox, where we talked extensively about software supply chain security. But essentially, software supply chain security is a set of practices that goes beyond only trying to secure things in production, securing software from the developer laptop all the way to production. And it's like a set of practices. There is frameworks, and there are also tools. So things like signing and verifying the signature of images, things like public key infrastructure, things like vulnerability scanning in artifacts, stuff like that. So this space is also huge, and is going to evolve over things like SBOM, like a software bill of material, stuff like that. So these are also one of the technologies that is going to probably change the way we do cloud native going forward for a while.
Yeah, it was really insightful. Like, second one, I was little familiar with, but first, like, I know really well because I'm talking. Yes, no one can guarantee it. Like, no one can tell it like we know it really well. It is like just booming. And last year it was like next level. Everyone was talking about eBPF, and we learned. And I'm also doing the talks on the same, like how can you do the Kubernetes observability with eBPF, and how you can move the future with eBPF as a service mesh. As recently, Istio launched the Ambient Mesh. So Ambient Mesh is one of the steps towards the sidecar-less kind of a service mesh. So it is nice.
Yeah, just keep in mind that Ambient Mesh is actually technically not eBPF based. The implementation.
No, it is not.
It's eBPF
It is correct.
is one way of doing
Yeah.
sidecarless service mesh. Yes, but it's not.
Yeah, Ambient Mesh is completely different. It is using the Z-tunnel proxy, and it has the various means like in short, it is like zero trust tunnel is there, which is leaves node per proxy, and previously we had the pod per proxy, so it is different. So
Yeah.
keep it in mind, audience. We don't want to go in that side. Another thing is, what you think on this question. So I want to ask this with every leaders in the cloud IT industry. So what you think on this side, like DevOps and platform engineering? Everyone is talking on the same. So do you think like platform engineering is evolving really fast? And what is actually the platform engineering? And to talk about the DevOps. So DevOps people think like, yeah, their career is in vain, or like they think like they will get stuck somewhere. It is like ChatGPT is booming, then we think like human work is gone and something. So is it similar to that? And do platform engineering is something we should really look out, and it is nice technology, and it is nice career to go ahead.
Yeah. So here is the probably my honest opinion first. I do not believe that anybody's job is going to disappear anytime soon with this platform engineering. Platform engineering, as far as I understand it, it is not more, not less than a marketing world that a lot of companies are using to sell stuff, right? Effectively, what it is, I mean, okay, let me rewind. Let me put it this way. If you are today a platform a DevOps engineer working on a company, providing a platform for developers to run stuff, you are doing platform engineering, right?
Right.
It's just that you have never thought about it this way, right? But the platform engineering, the idea is that instead of, so when DevOps was introduced a few years back, the idea of DevOps was, or at least not the idea, the DevOps itself, of course, is just a set of practices, right? And then every company implements DevOps differently. But the most common implementation of DevOps is the model that we call you build it, you own it. So you as a developer or as a DevOps person, you work in a team, you build and own the entire stack, including the application,
Yeah.
right? So you own the application, but you also own the stuff that the application runs on, right? So in the past, we used to have that ops versus dev model, which DevOps try to solve, where you would have people running stuff in production, and you will have people building things. And when the developer build things and finish them, they give them to the ops people, and they go to sleep, and the ops people have to try to put these things in production. DevOps try to break that barrier between ops and dev. It's let's just put these things together and have people build and run their own applications and build and run their own apps and own the entire stack on which those apps live. Now, what platform engineering is about is, let's developer focus on development, and let's build an internal team whose job would be to offer developers a platform which is easy to use, secure, automated, blah, 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 that they can run their applications on. So in a way, platform engineering is really kind of going back toward the ops versus dev model, but without the downsides of that model. The idea of platform engineering is that, how can I make my developers self-sufficient? How can I remove toil? Because the one of the problems with DevOps obviously is that if you follow the model of you build it, you own it, you would have a lot of repetitive work that is done by a lot of teams, right? There are a lot of automations that will be duplicated across multiple teams. There is a lot of pieces of infrastructure that would be duplicated across teams, etc. With platform engineering, the idea is, how can we form a platform and provide developers with a platform on which they can run the apps without having to repeat a lot of things themselves, right? So in a nutshell, platform engineering is just learning from the downsides of ops versus dev model and the downsides of the DevOps model and trying to solve them. But again, if you have been doing DevOps and you have been building platforms that either you run your applications on or you give other people to run their applications on, you've been doing platform engineering, right? It's just that and going back to your question about job loss and stuff like that, I don't think that anybody will have their job disappear because of platform engineering, because at the end, because first of all, we do not have as many the platform engineers as we would like. There are probably companies looking for platform engineers, but they don't find them because they don't exist. This thing is new, right?
Yeah.
And if you are listening to this and you're a DevOps engineer, just probably go to your resume, and whenever there is DevOps engineer, just change it to platform engineers and you will find a job. That's how I would say. Because it's the same skill set, right? That's what they're looking for, the same skill set. It's just like a way of looking and organizing things and the way of thinking about stuff. So
yeah, invested. I second it. So yeah, we have covered a lot of things today, and it was really exciting podcast for the audience. So to go and conclude this, I would like to ask you: do you have anything for our audience? Do you which are going forward, landing into the cloud native things? They want to learn the cloud native, and they focus on getting the cloud native jobs, or they are focusing on learning the cloud native from the YouTube or podcast and another resources which are available. So finding the resources also tough. So that's why we had some communities like DevOps community, then QSimplify, and then Google's own open source ones. So what you think, like, do you have any last conclusion words for our audience?
I mean, the internet is full of resources. If you really want to learn, there are quite a lot of places to learn and discover stuff. Just search on YouTube or search on Google. You will find a lot of articles, a lot of books, a lot of videos, a lot of things. My main advice I give people all the time is, if you are still learning, focus on the fundamentals. Learn the basics of computer science. Learn how to write code. Learn how distributed systems, how databases work, blah blah. These are skill sets that are going to be useful regardless of which job you land, right? If you want to go more towards security, it is going to be a huge thing going forward. I am suspecting that the next, salary survey that comes, that shows, those like yearly surveys that shows how much people are paid according to their jobs. I'm suspecting that the next one that is coming in 2023 by one of these companies doing these surveys, it's going to have security people at the top tier. If either the top 5 or the top 3 most paid jobs are going to be security focused jobs, because we live in a world where people and organizations are more hostile to other people, and security is becoming more and more important. Now, at the moment we are recording, you remember what happened this week? Linus Tech Tips lost his YouTube channel. He was hacked. I didn't know this.
No.
Yeah, so Linus Tech Tips, which is one of the most popular tech reviewers on YouTube, got his channel almost deleted. He managed to recover it eventually, and he did a video explaining what happened. But they compromised one of his employees' session IDs, and through that attack, they managed to get an API key, a long-lived API key for the YouTube channel, and they managed to basically start deleting some stuff and putting some streams on the YouTube channel. It was really bad. Anyway, security is going to be important. And if you have an interest and you want to pick your to go that way, go for it. It's going to be, you're going to make a lot of money and you're going to have a lot of fun. There are a lot of interesting things in that space as well. So that would be my advice.
Thanks for that. And for the audience, thanks for attending this Cloud Talks. I hope you have learned various things from the Abdul, and he is a really nice person to hear about. And if you want to learn more on the Kubernetes things and open source side of the Google, and also the community science or side of open source, so go to the Kubernetes Podcast. Everything is available there. You can learn about the things. And if you have any doubts about the Google advocacy and anything according to that, you can ask in the comments. Definitely Abdul will answer, or like I will answer the same, because I have contacts with some of the folks also, so I would be little capable to answer your questions. Another thing, thanks for joining, and if you want to learn some of these resources and stuff, I will share the link in the comments and description also. Thanks for having. Bye bye.